Don't translate well, you know?
They don't. Well, they
because
don't. Well, primarily healthcare, they're not criminals. They come in here, they're being seen for psychiatric or physical ailments. And so any training that you received in military or law enforcement is not going to necessarily translate to that customer service role that security really plays, at least at the initial point of the incident. And then, of course, we don't have arrest powers. We don't have qualified immunity. A lot of times we don't have the same resources that police have. So it makes it difficult for us to do our job along those lines, right? Because we don't have the same level of authority as police officers.
That's what it is. And I think the problem with us is that we don't have any authority either to be talking about any, arresting powers or telling people what to do or making them compliant with care. The insurance companies have really done a terrible job at pushing that down the organization's throats. And then it comes to the nurse. And I've even heard industry experts go out there and say, well, if the nurse tells you that they need help restraining, you're practicing under a nurse. And I'm like, that is not true. As a registered nurse, the only person I can delegate to is a CNA or an LPN or somebody that's been qualified by the same state board of nursing that I belong to. And I don't have the experience to go look at a security guy and know whether his physical techniques are good enough. Now, I do now, now that I've studied that for 4 years, but as a generic nurse, they don't have the capability. So when you go into the room, the organizations are basically, and I don't think it's intentional. I don't think any CEO out there is like, oh, I hope someone takes the fall for this. I think it's more of like just a gap in understanding where the responsibility lies, because these officers and security directors are coming in from that policing military aspect, and they assume that they have these powers and they aren't real. And then that clinical says, well, no, then they get the culture of where they defer to clinical, defer to clinical, defer to clinical. And then clinical's like, oh, well, I guess if that's what you want to do, but there's no like comprehensive, like, here's the standard with which we should practice to. And, and that's the whole premise behind, what we're trying to do that's different in the industry. So everyone, welcome to Tact Book. This is our awesome podcast, Tactical Scrubs. I'm so excited to have with me today Mr. Jonathan Del Castillo. I'm, another Latino in the field, and he is a boots on the ground. He works daily with these patients. Tell us a little bit, like, kind of how you got started in healthcare security. Like, where did you get into this environment?
So I've been doing security for about 25 years. I worked in corrections for about 5 or 6 years. I did contract security as an operation manager in Dallas. So I basically been in the security biz for a while. We did a contract for a hospital, medical center of Plano in Plano, Texas, to where I was starting that account. And I was really kind of impressed with I was not aware of the fact that stuff happens in hospitals. You're thinking, well, people are here to get help. Why are we holding people down? Why are people getting assaulted? Why are security having to go hands-on literally on a daily basis? So I thought that was really interesting. So when I moved to San Diego shortly after that, I was like, you know what? I wouldn't mind getting into hospital security. I thought it was pretty interesting. It looks like it's fun. I'm an adrenaline junkie. So I was like, this is pretty neat.
It's definitely that. Like, people don't understand. Like, they're like, oh, hospital security, that's like, RoboCop or Mall Cop, Paul Bart Mall Cop. I'm like, no, they have to be expertly trained. Like, they have to be super, super intellectual and super experienced at lots of things.
And the nuances of healthcare are much different than, let's say, in law enforcement, right? Because again, like we mentioned off the camera, these guys are not criminals, or at least initially we can't treat them as if they're criminals. Even if they show criminal behavior, they're here to seek help. A lot of them have psychiatric conditions, drug induced. They're just plain assholes. But at the same time, they're also clients. They're also customers. They're also seeking help. So being able to kind of manage all that and being able to understand that when we can come in and actually be security and when we have to kind of pull it back and defer to clinical, because there's underlying reasons why they're acting the way they are. So,
and I think that's one of the major barriers that I see. I'm glad that you bring up that point, because from a clinical perspective, and this is kind of like, I like to stay in my lane. I am not security. I don't claim to have policing experience. I just know what I know from being a nurse for almost 20 years, right?
Right.
And working in over 30 facilities as a travel nurse all around the country. So I
Right.
saw good, bad, and in between. And so what I think sometimes people don't understand the dynamic of clinical now. With 40% of our new graduate nurses leaving the profession in the first 2 years, you don't even have nurses that have any type of experience to identify that this person may be hypoxic, which is why they're thrashing around and combative. It's because they can't breathe, or because they have a metabolic imbalance, or because it's a psych diagnosis. Because the education system here in the United States for nursing is just way subpar. I mean, when you look at the type of training that these nurses get, it's basically how to pass a short answer and multiple choice test, and then they're thrown out there. The amount of nurses that I have precepted or trained that have never started an IV or never done anything because it was too liable for their organization or their university is it's appalling. Because when you go to other countries like the United Kingdom or Australia or Canada, they have to have X amount of clinical hours. Now, our nurses are getting clinical hours, but it's like 14 nursing students to one med surge floor, and they don't get to do anything. So they don't get the actual experience. And then the nurses that are there are so burned out and miserable, they don't want to take on more help. And so it's kind of like this cycle, and the violence is increasing because the
Yeah.
patients can see that. Like, think about it. If you've had a patient that's a dialysis patient that's been sick for 20 years, and they see now the type of nurse that's coming in the room, they're like terrified. So now you've
Right.
got this element of fear. The nurse is afraid, the patient's afraid, and that emotional response. A lot of times security comes in to really take that level down from 100 on both sides to like a 10. And that can be challenging if you don't have the right type of training for the officers.
Well, for sure. And the turnover rate, like you said, in healthcare, specifically in nursing, is so high that continuity of care, the learning curve for a lot of these new nurses coming in, they have to learn. You don't learn these
Mm-hmm.
things in nursing school. You don't learn how to de-escalate patients or understanding the root causes of behavior unless you're a behavioral health nurse. Now, I want to throw a statistic out there. Obviously, healthcare has the highest rate of workplace violence, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
14.2 workers per 10,000 workers. Behavioral
Yep.
health, it's 146 per 10,000. So that's a significant increase. So you talk about turnover, people coming in there getting their asses whooped. Yeah, you don't want to stay in that profession for very long.
And in the UK, the behavioral health departments are the ones that aren't violent because they have the training. So those nurses, like I walked through a maximum secure facility over there in England. It's like one of the newest facilities that's designed. And it was so cool. I mean, it looked like a really nice hotel. Like the boys that were in there, and these guys they're criminals, they have criminal behavior. You're dangerous guys. And of course, I go in there in like this, vest because I'm freezing because it's England and I'm from
Yeah,
Texas. And I look like some sort of cop or something. And they all come up.
right,
They're like, what do you want? And they had to do the alarms and everybody had to,
right.
I riled them all up. But when I saw the response that they had and the employees that had, they were small little girls like me, weren't terrified to be in the environment because they
Right.
knew they had good training, they had good resources, they had access. And I think that's the portion that nobody's wanting to talk about is if fear in this situation from a healthcare perspective, from a nurse perspective is good. Fear should make you more prepared. We have a
Right.
saying, fortune favors the prepared, right?
Right.
But if you throw them into this environment with zero training and you're so worried that they're going to quit once they find out that it's violent, so you don't tell them anything about it, well,
Right.
then you've just spent millions of dollars in the education system and to dump them out and we have no workforce. And
Yeah,
so,
onboarding employees costs a lot of money. They don't understand that. So it would behoove them to actually tell them in advance, like, listen, this is what you're going to be walking into instead of a trial by fire. That way people are prepared to understand that this is a different beast from what they
yeah.
learned in nursing
And there's
school.
a
It's not,
and
yeah,
there's a way to do it professionally, right? Even with the security training, I see a lot of training companies that are spending a whole day on mental health. Like, first of all, behavioral health is an extremely complex thing. And so
you read my post?
yeah, exactly. Your posts are phenomenal. I mean, that's why I'm having you on because I think like you're speaking the truth. You're telling the truth about things that nobody wants to talk about. And I think, behavioral health is not something that you learn in a classroom and then leave the classroom and remember all the diagnoses and all the there. First of all, security shouldn't be their primary mission, right? Their
It
primary
shouldn't.
mission is to make the scene safe and then maybe to identify that it's a potential psych issue or something's going on here. But that's not their responsibility. And you're wasting a tremendous amount of time on throwing behavioral health down someone's throat who really doesn't give a fuck. Honestly, they don't care.
They don't.
So,
Yeah, you're right.
not that they don't care in a compassionate kind of way, because a lot of the guys that go into healthcare security are pretty compassionate folks.
Right.
It's that
Yeah.
they don't care because they don't have the capacity to understand a discipline like that
Well,
in a
you
short
don't have the
amount of time.
capacity either if you throw out a 2-hour PowerPoint and that's all you give them. I mean, if you're going to provide the training, it needs to be more comprehensive. It needs to be more than a 2-hour PowerPoint. There needs to be a scenario-based training. It needs to be ongoing, like we talked about, even off camera, continued education. Like that's like super important. You can't just go 2 hours and you're good. And we'll do this maybe once a year as a refresher.
Yeah,
That's
and
not
then
simply good enough.
charge an organization $2 million, $3 million to do that. I mean, that's just highway robbery to me.
It is.
And with technology and all the things that were available, there's no reason why you can't provide digital training and some other options in collaboration with your physical sims. I tell my guys, if you're working today, you better have done 3 scenarios. You better have rolled with each other. You better have done some holding techniques. You better have done some practice with some different scenarios. I don't want to hear that they've gone through a 12-hour shift and haven't simulated an emergency. Because
Right.
what are you doing? I mean, we know that for 12 hours, I mean, some days like shit hits the fan and it's bad
Right.
and you're busy and you're running. But most of the time there's a downtime, there's a period of turnover. Like you could take that 5 minutes to simulate something or do your physical restraints.
That's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
I got with our clinical education coordinator because I teach a class called Escalating Behavior Recognition and Response. It's essentially a de-escalation program, no different than CPI or MOAB or all these other Evade, all these classes. What I've actually got with the clinical education coordinator on was to implement scenarios, not just to read from a PowerPoint and read from a script. So now we do about 4 scenarios. We don't have any more time to do any more than that because it's a 2-hour class, but we do 4 scenarios and it's all based on behavior recognition. So I'll be a psych patient on one. I'll be a institutionalized, recently released ex-con. I'll be a regular patient who's simply
I bet
anxious.
you play that really well, Jonathan.
I'm really good. I watch Blood In, Blood Out right before I do it.
You know
think
what?
I'm laughing, but I'm serious.
I can't get that 3 hours of my life back. But
It's literally 3 hours. You know that, right?
I know. That's why I said that. And
It's
at the
literally
end,
a 3-hour
what's
movie.
what's the kid's name that dies from the heroin? He's like, oh, and he's yelling his name. I don't remember what he
The
says.
guy, he was a painter, right?
Yes. And he's like,
I
oh,
forgot his name. Not
like
Miklo. I'm Miklo.
Yeah,
I forgot his name.
Like,
no,
yeah,
he's a good actor, though.
That's a great movie, guys. If you haven't seen it, of course.
Blood In, Blood Out. Bound by Honor. That's the official title.
Exactly.
No, I got with the clinical education coordinator. I said, listen, we got to do scenarios because so basically I do onboarding for the new employee orientations. Not every nurse has been a nurse for more than 5 years. Some of them are brand new to the profession and they have no clue, kind of like what I walked into in healthcare, like, oh, wow, shit happens here. There's violence. Like, wow, I thought people were just trying to get help. And so when I do these scenarios, it's really eye-opening. It's like, really, you guys experience this? And I'm like, all these scenarios are based on things that I've actually gone through. And they really appreciate the training. And then 3-4 weeks later, I see them, in the department. It's like, oh yeah, we've already had to restrain somebody and hold somebody down or call security. So preparing these guys mentally more than anything, because like I said, muscle memory is a big thing. And if you're not doing training frequently enough, you're not going to retain enough of this information. However, the only thing that I can control is not the frequency of the training, but is the quality of the training. Right. At least they're mentally prepared going into the situation, even though they may not be able to retain necessarily some of the techniques and principles that I'm trying to teach them. See my cat?
I love him. He's so cute.
He's a shoulder cat. So
I am not a cat person, but I like black cats. Maybe that's, I don't know. I love black cats. I think they're
black
awesome.
Cats too. I like black cats too.
And the orange tabbies. The orange tabbies have always been really nice. I don't know.
Isn't that Heathcliff? That's Heathcliff, right?
Yeah, something like that.
The cartoon Heathcliff. I think it's the orange cat.
Yep. Garfield,
Garfield,
Yeah.
Heathcliff, all of them.
Yeah.
I just think it's important that these guys see what they're going to experience in the field.
Right.
You know, not read a PowerPoint that we go over the stages of conflict, anxiety, emotional confrontation, physical aggression, and then just go on to the next.
And honestly, if you're telling me that on my first week as a nurse ever, I'm not remembering shit you're saying because
Right,
I'm terrified about going out there and actually killing someone because I've
right,
never done this before. So I think like in orientation, I think you cover the proper response protocol. And I think that's one of the things that I see missing in training anywhere. Like whether you're looking at CPI, Evade, Moab, any of these. I have not found a training company yet. And I'm telling you, I've looked at all of them. And
I believe it.
if I haven't been in your class, for everybody listening, someone I know has been in your class on purpose because we put them there.
Right,
So I have looked at everything.
right,
And so I know that the problem is that they don't teach nurses how to identify a potential threat fast enough. And then they don't teach them how to respond fast enough or actually what to do or what the policy or procedure is because
right.
most companies and most organizations in healthcare don't have a physical protocol. And I tell people all the time, there's a difference between training, then there's a difference between competency, there's a difference between protocol, there's a difference between policy, and there's a difference between procedure. And
Right.
all of that has to be combined into one educational lesson. And it's possible to do it, but you have to do it in almost micro content as the nurses are coming on board,
Yeah, information overload's a real thing, and that's why I emphasize that the ongoing training, like you said, the setting aside some time on your shift when there's dead time to do scenarios. 2 hours of a PowerPoint is not going to get it done. An 8 hour de-escalation self-defense course is not going to get it done. And so I do the best I can with the time that I have. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to teach clinical staff the way I teach my security guys because I
Yeah.
work with them in the department. But yeah, training is lacking. Training is not sufficient. Training, unfortunately, policies are also handicapping what we can do too,
Yep.
because there's policies in place, but they're so ambiguous and unenforceable that they're not able to be enforced.
And I
So
think
even if a
that's
policy says from a use of force standpoint, you can do A, B, and C, when you do it and you use the tools that you use in your training, they get upset that you use them because
yep.
the outcome is a patient gets hurt or you get hurt or somebody gets hurt.
And that's because the training here is so far behind. Like
Right,
what training? I like if you came to the UK with us, which we've decided we're going to put you through all our training, which I'm so
right,
excited about. I like when you see that, you're like, oh, because they don't get hurt because you've got appropriate people. Number one, you can't restrain someone one-on-one or two-on-one. Like that's unpractical. You need 3 people that are highly trained. And it shouldn't be just security getting physical restraint training. Now, when I do restraint training all over the country that I've seen as a nurse, it's just how to actually put the restraint on and make sure you don't tie it too tight. There's nothing to do with actually what is the physical mechanics of watching somebody move and trying to get in range and trying to actually get control of their body. Like there is no training on that because God forbid we should teach nurses how to do that. But the thing is, they walk into the environment terrified, and then the situation becomes worse than it could have been if we all looked at each other and were like, okay, we know what we're going to do, and we have our roles and responsibilities and go in the room and take care of it for the patient.
well, we do limb control. So I do an exercise where I'm on a blow up mattress and I simulate being a combative patient. So basically I teach them proper limb control, wrists, shoulders for the upper extremities, and then above and below the knee
Yep.
for joint control. And it's a good exercise. The problem is we don't do it frequently enough,
Yep.
right? We do one exercise every 2 years because they have to get research every 2 years. And then so now they have to use that knowledge, apply that knowledge to real life scenarios. And they're gonna forget. They're gonna
Well, and it's
forget.
not that, but it's not easy. Like limb control, it's not like you've been doing it for 20 years. Like when I first started learning, it's not as easy as it looks. And it's something that's a perishable skill. And like in the UK, you'll see even police officers on the street. I've seen them walk somebody handcuffed in front, arm in arm, instead of, dragging them behind. Like, just the culture is different with which how we present and interact with people. And I think healthcare now, especially with body cams coming in, like once
Yeah, we
those
got 'em.
body cams start recording, like a family can subpoena that footage. We can get all kinds of footage. And I think organizations are just throwing them out there and like, good luck. But what do you do when you record literally negligence in care? What do you do when the nurse turning it on and says, you know what, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to turn my body camera on? That's coercion, and that's against the Constitution. And if
It
you're
is.
not explaining the rules of using a body cam, and you don't have a strong policy and procedure to support you, any lawyer worth their weight can throw that under the bus. And the person that's going to take the blunt of that is not the organization. It's the frontline staff or the frontline
Of
officer.
course.
And then you lose another 2 staff members, right? And so that word
Yep.
starts to, matriculate, and we get an idea that we're just not going to work there. We don't want to work at that organization, or we don't want to work in healthcare anymore because nobody has our back when we're literally, risking our lives to take care of these people for an organization to profit off.
And honestly, it's funny that you say about the body cam policy. We don't even have a body cam policy. We're told basically through memorandums and emails. Yes. So there's technically not a policy that even mentions body cam other than that's part of our uniform.
How would you, that's like me saying, okay, we're going to bring in a new IV pump and we're going to put this IV pump up and we're not going to have an IV policy.
Think about it. It's convenient for them.
What?
It's called plausible deniability. So you don't have a policy in place. Something goes awry. They're not legally responsible. And they can use, like you said, frontline workers as the fall guys or fall women to say that, well, we didn't teach them that. And it's nowhere listed.
And that's where I tell healthcare workers all the time. If somebody's bringing a body cam in, you say, no, I want to see the policy before you put that on me.
I feel like you worked with me a couple months ago. We literally had that situation where the nurse did not feel comfortable with me having the body cam. I told him, unfortunately, it's part of the uniform. I don't have to use it necessarily, but we've been told by our senior leaders to turn it on in the event that somebody's starting to escalate. So the first signs of escalation, let's say they use profanities or directed threats, I double tap it and I immediately go on. Now, some of the nurses don't feel comfortable with being recorded due to a variety of reasons. Patient confidentiality, them being scrutinized potentially with how they're giving, the care to the patient, or just simply philosophical reasons like, I don't feel like this is like right. Like, I don't think this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I actually had a nurse ask me, like, is there a body cam or policy that you guys have in place? And I'm like, unfortunately, no. I was very candid.
And that's the thing with me. Like, say, I'm in law school currently. So I'm like, look, I'm going to figure out a way to do this, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy taking to those members of government, which I meet with. And I'm like, look, if you're going to do this, this is the trend, because the body cameras, and the technology systems and whatever, they're going to make money and profit off this sphere, whatever. That's fine. If you want to do that, great. But you have to have the things in place, because what's going to come back eventually is it's going to come back to bite you, and I think that nurses are going to start really stepping up and being like, I have rights as a worker, and I'm going to advocate not only for myself, but for my patients, and I think if you place something like that in an environment and don't have policy and procedure and training, I mean, our body cam training that we recommend does things like proxemics. We talk about what to say, what not to say. We talk about hand placement. I mean, the difference between you need to stay in that bed and, sir, I'd like to have, open palms, distancing, all of the things that need to be done when you turn that camera on. No one's training anybody in that environment.
They're not. When we train on soft, empty hands techniques, like the open hand and all that stuff, but in terms of what we're supposed to do while on cam, none of that's we haven't been educated on that at all. The only thing we've been told is turn it on when the person starts becoming agitated. Beyond that, there's nothing
then we can place blame on the patient for being upset.
Right.
And usually these patients, it's a systems error, right? They're waiting for something, their food wasn't good. And that's because, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was really this push for compliance and a push for the experience that a hospital had because the competition was getting so steep.
Mhm.
So they wanted a way that they could kind of encourage patients to come to our organization. And then they wanted to try and control some quality. And because people were complaining, our local hospital has terrible food and we can't eat there, we're getting sick. Like, I get it. I understand the reason for these scores and these things to go back to Medicare and Medicaid to get funding. But now it's turned into, if our patients aren't happy, we don't care if we cured cancer in your family member, but as long as the nurse gave you enough pain medication, that's all that matters. And a lot of these initiatives are being driven by big pharmaceutical companies.
Of
Because
course. Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
and 80% of the education, nursing education, is funded by big pharma.
There's definitely conflicts of interest there for sure. It's about money.
Yep.
It's about bottom line. I mean, just going back to workplace violence, I mean, obviously the C-suite, wouldn't mind having certain measures in place as long as it reduces the liability on their part. I don't think they want healthcare workers to get assaulted, but they're not willing
No.
to invest enough into making it safe for them. I
Right.
literally had a senior leader tell me that they rather see a patient or a staff member be assaulted than a patient because of the liability. And they even told me that due to the inherent nature of healthcare, you basically sign your life away to be a punching bag. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course. They didn't say it just like that, but that's basically what they told me. And it basically,
And
yeah,
that's probably upsetting because to someone like you, you're like, I believe that we could both be safe. Like, there's no reason why the patient should be assaulted or the healthcare worker. Like, why are we saying that there has to be one or the other and we're not thinking of creative solutions to
they make it
prevent
seem like it's mutually exclusive. You can do both, but it takes some effort. Mainly, it takes support. I mean, these senior leaders need to be being so litigation conscious and focus on staff retention and things like that. Enforceable policies, zero tolerance policies are ridiculous. They're almost impossible to enforce,
They
and
are
it gives a false sense of
impossible.
security.
And
Yeah,
it makes it worse. It makes it worse
it
for the
does.
employee. It makes it worse for the customer or the patient because we can't promise that. We can't promise that, somebody's going to be held accountable all the way. And I've heard people be like, well, that's not what it means. It means that we want to work towards zero incidents. I was like, then fucking say that.
Then say
Don't
that.
say zero tolerance, because that tolerance is the permissible acceptance of something. If you look at the
Right.
definition of the word. So if we're going to
Yeah.
go for zero tolerance, we don't tolerate it. It's not permissible in our organization at all. That means you have
Right.
to be ready to kick these people to the curb. And we both know they're not ready to do that. But when
They're
you're
not.
looking at levels of legislation, the constitutional law comes first. So my right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and my own safety and my worker safety supersedes EMTALA. It supersedes any policy that organization has. Now, I might be terminated, but I can always go back and say, well, I was terminated for X, Y, and Z. And I think that's the trend that we're going to see is these nurses and security professionals and people that are on the front lines are going to start stepping up and being like, look, there wasn't the proper things in place. And the more education that we can do to legislators and the federal government on our side of the nonprofit to say, look, here are where the gaps are. Here are people doing it really, really well. Where can we find some synergy in between?
That's the real question. I just think it takes more than training. It takes more than people saying that we have policies that are going to protect our employees. It takes a tremendous amount of effort from senior leaders to clinical to security. It takes more than just one or two things. And I think you're on the right track to changing the status quo. And especially I think you mentioned something along the line of trying to push for legislation that basically penalizes healthcare organizations and regulatory agencies for allowing workplace violence to occur and for having weak policies in place, and to push for workplace violence leaders that are specifically there to train and to oversee programs. And I think until that happens, until you hit these guys in their pockets, until there's some type of punitive measures in place to give sanctions to these folks, nothing's going to change. It comes down to money. At the end of the day, it comes down to money. Until that's an issue to where that creates a deterrent to not supporting employees or to prosecuting patients, that's not going to happen. until that
Yeah. And
happens.
the prosecution of patients is just, I use this analogy all the time. It's like back before we had CPR and people knew CPR, kids died of sudden cardiac death, right? They would just drop dead. And that's like the government coming to them and being like, we're so sorry that happened. You know what? We'll pay for your kid's funeral instead of providing CPR training to everyone so that your
Right.
kid lives. Like, it's the same thing. If we're sorry you got assaulted, we'll help you press charges. And a lot of the organizations, you have to go through the policy of the organization to actually even press charges. So they have the opportunity to come in. Those corporate lawyers are not dumb, you know? They'll come in and be like, hey, you know, this happened and it's so terrible. Let me offer you this X amount of dollars and yada, yada, to sweep that under the rug. When in reality, if we provided the training first and we invested in the employee, then we wouldn't even have to be prosecuting people. And if we
No,
fix the systems issues and we did the things that we need to do to provide safe and valuable care and quality care, then we wouldn't even have these problems. I want to ask you a question because you've been in the industry a long time. You know, a lot of people ask me, Mel, do you think the violence is really increasing, or do you think it's just that people are, you know, talking about it more? What do you think about that? Do you think that the violence is increasing, or do you think it's just that people are now taking an active role in that?
well, statistically, it is increasing. It's proven. So we know that 20% of all workplace violence incidents are being reported, just 20%. If the amount of reported incidents are increasing and the same percentage of reporting of incidents are being reported, then that definitely tells you there's an increase in workplace violence. There's no
I think it's
disputing
the
that.
culture. I think it's the culture. I think that because we don't have seasoned clinicians, like when I was a nurse, I learned from an experienced nurse, right? And so she was able to manage these patients a little bit better because she had more experience with them. And there was backing from the organization. You could call the doctor in and he would come in and say, hey, stop punching my nurse, you know, or we're going to get you out of here. And that was a patient that they'd probably seen their whole lives, you know. And so things were different. And so as that's shifted, and I think as the culture has shifted, people are starting to report more, because I don't know if you know any 20-year-old girls and boys right now, but they're completely different than you and I at 20. And what's a good thing? I mean, they're,
Yes.
you know, inspired, they're uplifting, they're really smart, they're really great at technology, you know, but they have a lot of social issues because they didn't have the same type of upbringing where you and I have to talk to each other as, you know, these kids who are constantly on their phone. And if you walk around the hospital, I bet you'll see the majority of your nurses are scrolling on the phone. And when I was in as a nurse, we couldn't even have our phone. We had to lock it up in the locker. And if your kid needed to get in touch with you, they had the unit
I
number and
remember
they'd
that.
call, can I talk to my mom? Because what we were in downtime, you were reading journal articles, you were taking care of your patient, you were cleaning the rooms, but now I talked to one of our executives in our organization and she's an anesthesiologist. And she's like, I couldn't even imagine doing my job without my phone now. So, you know, and
Yeah.
that's where we kind of came up with that intermediate solution. Can we create a social platform where we can host a training, host the resources, and then be able to, I love your cat, he's so good, host the resources and be able to, you know, provide something that they can scroll on during the day, get
Right.
alerts, get mass notification, get whatever they need, and still feel
Yeah.
like they're connected to their peers in their environment.
I actually agree with all of that. But going back to your original question, it is increasing.
Yeah, I agree. I think so
The
too.
reporting incidents are increasing. The same amount of percentage that are being reported has remained the same. I've been witness to it over 9 years. The sample size that I've had is pretty large. I've worked at about 4 hospitals now, starting in 2015. And every single year that goes by, I have more stories to tell. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess, I mean, and I don't mean in the sense that because I've worked 9 years, but every year it seems like there's additional incidents that I've never experienced that are happening. Getting my radio taken away from me and hit it over the head with it.
Yep.
Like stuff that I thought could never happen is now happening. I've had to tase 3 people in the last 3 years, whereas before that, I never tased anybody. A
People are
lot of it comes down.
frustrated. People are mad at the system and they
They're
can't
mad at
get
the
to.
system, rightfully
Yep.
so, because healthcare has been duping these guys financially.
Mm-hmm.
Healthcare is just a total racket. And so people get frustrated. And then you got people that are homeless off medication. undiagnosed medical psychiatric conditions, who have short staffing. I mean, the fact that there's just short staffing in healthcare means that the quality of care has gone down.
Yep.
Patient arrival to bedtimes have increased. There's a whole bunch of reasons why workplace violence will continue to rise.
Yep.
There's a whole slew of reasons. I don't even want to get into them.
And that's why I think it's important that there's people that are brave enough to say something. Because we could sit at home and be like, oh, we got to go back to work and blah, 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 and not say anything. But are we really advocating for our patients at that point? If the organization is saying, you know, hey, we want you to be patient advocates and we want to have great customer service and we want to have blah, 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 then aren't you supposed to be saying something? And then ethically, if you're an officer or you're an RN or you're a doctor, you take an oath to uphold your profession. And I think that there's a lot of nurses, especially CNOs at the top, have kind of forgotten that they took an oath to make sure that patients have received quality care and are in a safe space. And I mean, psychological safety is just as important as physical safety.
It is. But see, the psychological safety is lacking because there's a dichotomy. Yes, they want improved patient care, but at what expense? So let's say you're vocal about what's going on. As you know, now you're persona non grata, and you're deemed a problem, a malcontent. And then when you continue to make these complaints, they find ways to get rid of you. So people see that, and who aren't about that life like we are, hey, I got bills to pay. Maybe I need to shut my mouth on this.
And so
that's why I'm trying to say that workplace violence is definitely increasing, because while you're saying that there's different generation now that are more outspoken, there's also still a generation that's in healthcare right now, whether it be millennials or Gen X. We got bills to pay, man. I'm taking care of my grandparents. Let me get this cat off me.
No, it's fine. I like him.
We're taking care of families. We're taking care of my grandparents. I got bills galore. You're going to think twice about bringing this to the attention of your leaders, whether it be clinical leaders or security leaders. I know even with me, I'm hesitant to completely go all out when it comes to expressing my opinions of what's going on. But sometimes
it's like a professionalism element of it too. You know, like
right.
I think there is a desire to be professional, and there is a way to do it, you know, professionally. And I think that's part of the training that is essential to nurses. Like, how do you voice the concerns that you have? How do you do it in the proper channels? And then who is the appropriate person to receive that message and to advocate together and say, hey, let's come up with a solution. You know, when I was an executive in healthcare organizations, if somebody came to me to complain, that was fine, but you better have a solution to the problem.
Right. And a lot of it comes down to, I'll be honest with you, information sharing and documentation. A lot of these safety reporting programs and processes are very difficult if they even have them in place.
Yep.
A lot of times, like with the staff that I work with, they don't even know how to get to the safety reporting document.
And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that, because they don't want the reports to come in. They're made to not be user friendly. I mean, they're desktop applications that you have to log in and then fill out all this information. It takes forever, and no one has the time to do that. And, you know,
they don't.
And that's why we developed the threat assessment portion of our app, where you can just log in. Here's the behaviors I see, and it cues a response, tells you what to do, notifies the people that need to be notified, and we're rolling. And that incident report is started in real time. And the nurse can open up as many of them as they need to during their day and then complete them, you know? And I think that's the part but then again, you have the OSHA report. You know, they get together that panel of OSHA guys and they're like, that would be, you know, overly burdensome to try and document all the incidents. Well, I'm sorry. Is it overly burdensome that I've held my pee for 12 hours today at 8 months pregnant and got kicked all day in the belly to take care of some guy that was dying because I'm the only qualified CRRT operator in the hospital, and I just happen to be the one here today that's pregnant, and I'll risk my life for this guy.
I'm telling you, man. The tools are there, though, but like you said, they're being dissuaded from using them or making it difficult to where it's not user-friendly. I mean, they have violence risk assessments on Epic, for example, but
there's no response protocol. You do it, you're like, oh, great, this person's violent, beautiful. Like, what does that do for you other than flag the patient and then we treat them differently next time they come in instead of figuring out why? I mean, there are people behind these behaviors.
Right. But see, that's lost on that. It's simply about documenting, and then it just stops there. What do you do beyond documenting it? So, for example, we have access to Epic as well, but it's not streamlined with the clinicals Epic. So
Yeah.
any flagging that's done in terms of violence risk assessments, we never receive. So all our information is a result of us actually going there and initiating our conversations like, so-and-so in room 25, what's going on with him? Oh yeah, we
Yep.
conducted a violence risk assessment. They're a high level threat. And so then we go through a checklist and then we do it, and then that's it. The good thing about that is at least it allows us to know that, okay, guy in 23 is a problem. Let's do some extra patrols over there.
Right.
But then there's times when a violence risk assessment is conducted without our knowledge. So you're right. You do the information, you do the assessment, but there's got to be more to it. It just doesn't stop at the assessment. What's after action?
I think the issue that I have with it is that because security has tried to gatekeep clinical for so long, and I think it's because clinical has always been like, oh, just take care of it. Just take care of it. You can figure it out with no budget, no resources, and all the things. Clinical, someone comes in with a stroke, and we have a very robust stroke protocol with time periods. For a heart attack, you're going to get the same medications around the world when you're having a heart attack, no matter where you are. So don't tell me that we can't develop some sort of response protocol that works. I mean, we do it every day in healthcare.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of being creative about it and getting the right experts in the room. And, that's what I've spent my time doing. And I think that us having these conversations in a way that, we say some pretty controversial stuff that other people aren't comfortable saying. But what if I don't say something and you don't say something, and the people in our network that are dedicated to making an actual change here don't say something, then we're just going to, continue to have these issues. And one day, all of us are going to be patients.
Yeah, you're right. Listen, the bottom line is not being affected, which is the reason why this continues to happen. Until the bottom line is affected, is going to prompt these guys to make change. It's too inconvenient for them. It's too unnecessary for them to come up with these protocols that improve safety if it's not affecting the bottom line. Yeah, we're losing healthcare workers, but we'll just give the nurse 9 patients now. So we're actually saving money. They look at it like this.
Yep.
We're still able to see the same amount of patients. Nurses are just simply going to have to work harder. Security is simply going to have to work harder. If you think about it, the business model is this. We're paying less workers to do the job, so we're saving money. The bottom line's not being affected, and we're not being held to the fire when it comes to workplace violence and effective protocols. Again, until you push legislation that is centered around giving these guys fines for allowing certain things to happen, until that happens, nothing's going to change. So at the end of the day, it comes down to bottom line. Nothing else will change until that's affected.
I think when I started looking at a consulting model, right, I was like, oh, there's plenty of people that build workplace violence committees like that. But that you can build a committee all day and have meetings all day. But unless you fix the other issues in the system, you're not going to make any actionable change. Like there's not, you can be an expert and, say all these things and provide all this training, but you have to shift the actual physical culture. And I don't know if you've met us nurses, but we're not the most, oh, let's do something new type people, because we get stuff thrown at us all the time. So we're really resistant to change. And I think that's where the counterinsurgency model, when I was looking at something, I was like, look, what can I look at that's comprehensive into an environment that's hostile, and that we know that can work in operations in all of the areas, and where can we, make healthcare profitable? If you look at all these organizations that are being bought up by these venture capital funds, a lot of times they're just floated on revenue of larger organizations. They're not actually fixing the problems.
No, they're not.
Because revenue ultimately will always flow to quality. If you don't have quality, it might be a longer stretch. Sure, you could cut things down in the beginning, but then you're going to close your critical access hospitals. We're seeing the result of venture capitalists coming in and buying up these organizations and running them as profitable businesses. There is a way to have profitable businesses that have a commitment to quality care because I've gone and looked at them and I've looked at their operations and I've talked to these people that are building mental health facilities that are maximum secure, that are making millions of dollars a fucking week. That's possible, but you have to look outside your little box of tools that you have. And I think that's where organizations are really kind of shooting themselves in the foot. They're gatekeeping themselves from getting the information.
Well, think about it like this too. Most senior leaders, C-suite, they do their 5 years at an organization and they go to the next organization. So in terms of metrics, in terms of workplace violence numbers, in terms of patient care, I don't know if they care, because that person.
They do. I would negate you on this. I would say that if I have an MBA and I'm a experienced executive, I could probably go get a job at a Fortune 500 company that's not healthcare. So I think some of them have personal buy-in to it. I think it's a lack of edge. Like they just don't know what to do. Like they've got so many things on their list that they just don't understand that by using certain models and using people that have figured this out outside of your network, that you could solve all the problems at one time inside your organization.
They do know. That's what I'm saying. I just don't think they're prioritizing it, because there's been a lot of good ideas, a lot of good things that we've implemented, at least specifically to my organization, but you still got to enforce it. For whatever reason, they come up with these solutions that are actually quite good at the surface, but they don't want to, they're scared to enforce it. So you have these use of force policies in place on the security end. You train us on how to do elbow strikes, but if we use the elbow strike,
why would you even teach that inside a hospital?
That's a whole other issue. Right.
That's not use of force. That's not use of, let's clarify.
Yeah.
Use of force is for policing and for military. We do not use of force inside healthcare. We use physical restraint training and we may use, protective techniques, but we're not using force inside a healthcare organization. And I think that's the core problem. We could have a whole podcast about that conversation.
Well, that comes back to the fact that these guys, these military, these ex-law enforcement guys, listen, they implemented a use of force continuum that I used when I was in corrections. That's literally in our SOPs.
No.
Level of force and control compared to the patient's level of resistance. It starts up officer presence, directives, soft empty hands, conducted energy weapons, so neuromuscular incapacitation, hard hands, and then lethal force.
That's so stupid, because you can literally do all that without hurting anybody. And I have done it as a 4'11" female. I have kept a 300-pound guy in the bed without hurting him. So that to me is just laziness, downright fucking laziness.
No, it is laziness. But again, it points to the fact that this is how they want to approach hospital security. They want to turn us into these RoboCops, like I think you mentioned that earlier. Mm-hmm. And everything has to be punitive. Everything has to be, we got to hurt somebody. We got to make sure that we don't allow them to hurt anybody, without realizing the root causes of why they're doing the things that they're doing.
And then when you guys leave, we become the target for more violence because I allowed that to happen. And technically, under my oath, I took to do no harm, to not do harm to the patients.
And then we come in and do harm.
Right. So I can't uphold my ethical oath, and now they're mad at me and I become a target of violence. It's just not a good thing. I mean, there's ways that you have to learn to manage these people, of course. Like we have to go hands-on. We have to sometimes restrain them. But we're the only country in the world that still ties people to beds.
Right. And you mentioned that before off camera, and the UK has more of a patient-centered approach, which we obviously lack. But it comes down to leadership. It comes down to having the right leaders in place.
Yep.
Security, I'm telling you right now, I've worked hospital security for long enough to see that the people that are decision makers in the security departments don't understand how this works. They don't. BCBAs, psychiatrists, nurse practitioners, and I'm being dead serious, they should be at the very top of public safety leadership.
And a lot of them don't even have the right training to do this because they haven't received it either. I say all the time that's why I don't call it healthcare security, because I think that security, they look at security as eliminating all of threats, but that's not even what security really is. Security is identifying the threat and then coming up with responses to the threat. And in
Right.
healthcare, it really is the presence of connection. And they've got the asset all wrong. The asset is not the patient or the nurse or the facility. The asset is the relationship that exists between a patient and a provider, or a patient and the organization they're going into. And that's what you have to protect. So it's not just a physical body, it's the culture and collaboration that exists there. And that's something that, like, I have been screaming this from the top of the world for the last 5 years. And still the IHSS has not offered me a speaking position or not offered me an opportunity to come and talk about this. And it's because I'm telling the truth. And I
Well, you're
think that
telling,
that's okay. And I'm okay with that because I'm happy to collaborate with them and I'm happy to get valuable resources from them. And I think there's some absolutely brilliant people that are part of the organization. But I also think that taking all this money from these technology companies to run your company is driving the reason why we can't see progress on the other ends, because they're spending all their money. Like, who decided it was a good idea to put weapons detection systems in all of California? I could kill you with a ballpoint pen if I wanted to. That's ridiculous.
so if you're dead set on shooting up the place or stabbing somebody, you're not going to stop at a metal detector, take your shoes off. Hey, hold on one second. Let me put my cell phone in there. You're simply going to go right through it and you're going to start blasting away. It's a waste of resources. It actually costs more money because now you have to man it. So it's just a bad thing. Weapons, for example, having firearms. Now you need insurance to protect the officers in the event that they use the firearm on somebody. What if they end up shooting somebody else? As you know, hospitals are hustling, bustling. It's busy. If something happens, it's more than likely going to happen probably in a waiting area or in a patient care area where there's multiple staff members, patients around, and you have to make a split decision to shoot or not to shoot.
And
And I
if
hate,
your guys are going to the range twice a week, they shouldn't be carrying a firearm.
listen, we're barely going through psychiatric evaluations. We don't go through training. We don't go through psych evals for the most part. Now, the last job I had, we went through a psych evaluation, but my previous job that I carried, we did not.
And a
So
psych
you're paying,
evaluation means nothing. That's a checklist that somebody signs off. Yeah, you look like you're good. It's not we do 6 weeks of monitoring and we're gonna make sure that whatever issues that you have, we're treating. And if you don't pass the evaluation, then we give you another job that doesn't require you to carry a firearm. Because it's
yeah,
okay if you have issues. It's okay if you have mental health concerns. And then as somebody that's looking to employ you, then it becomes my responsibility to make sure that you get the access to the care that you need. And I think
yeah,
that's a portion of this. I think there is an appropriate place for weapons because we have weapons in the United States, especially here in Texas. Everybody carries a gun. So I think that there is an opportunity where, the only appropriate use of force and level of force is a firearm if someone has a firearm. But if you're going to
right. But
do that,
here's the problem, though. So the majority of workplace violence is perpetrated by psych patients. It is actually proven. I have actually just looked at it before I came on
really,
here.
it
Yes,
probably in the US, but I don't think that those statistics are,
they're
I don't
skewed.
think that they're skewed because they're reporting them and they have better incident reporting metrics in psych. I think that the majority of workplace violence that's deadly comes from employees and former employees and aggravated family members. If you want my honest opinion, it's not psych patients. Psych patients generally, they're pretty much internal. They're pretty much dealing with their own struggles. The violence, as far as physical violence, is a manifestation of us not managing their psychosis and their diagnoses properly.
Well, I agree with that. I'm just saying, I don't mean it in the classic sense. There's a lot of people that are undiagnosed that come into the hospital, or they're vagrants, or there's situations where, I mean, if you're a homeless person, you're probably going through some psych issues just from the simple fact that you don't have
Well,
shelter.
and I think this is one of the things that I learned in the UK was that when these clinicians over there have really high degrees of psych training, and it's much different than our psych training because our psych training here in the United States is funded by big pharma. So they're going to push pharmaceuticals to fix that. They're not pushing any holistic solutions. So when you look at the training that psych people get in the UK, they have a completely different concept. Like suicide is not considered a mental health thing over there because it's not. Just because you're suicidal doesn't mean that you have a mental health problem. Just because you have criminal behavior or you're traumatized doesn't mean that you have a mental health diagnoses. And we group all that together in the United States, and it really does us an injustice for the patients
I
and for
agree
the
with that. When
employees.
I worked in the prison system, though, and statistically, again, data can be skewed.
Those, yes, they're very traumatized usually, and that's where their psyche is coming from. Yeah.
Most institutionalized people have a low degree of education. They have underlying issues which is the reason why they're criminals. So that's why I kind of I kind of gave it an umbrella, and that's not fair to them. But statistically, what I'm saying is it's not people coming in for a severed finger is what I'm saying. The majority of the violence are people coming in for problems, typically psychiatric related or SI, HI. SI in itself is not a psych condition. However, we classify here, at least in this country, is under that umbrella. And that's kind of what I meant by that.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying. It's not.
And I'm in no way like saying that what you're saying is wrong. I'm just trying to clarify for people who are listening, because that's an important
distinction.
Learning. Yeah. And that's an important learning opportunity for people that might be listening to understand that, usually psych patients, if you handle them well and you know what to do, they don't escalate. It's the care providers and the people that don't know how to handle those situations, or the fact that you bring in an HI or an SI and let them sit in an ED board for 4 days while they're looking for a bed because we don't have resources. And then they escalate. Of course they do, because they have to wear freaking paper scrubs. Like, what kind of crap is that? Like, how humiliating that, and as someone that has had SI issues, and the reason I didn't go seek help was because I knew they were going to put me in paper scrubs and I'd lay in the ER freezing and hungry and all of the things. I was like, fine, if I decide to do it, I'll just do it.
You
And
have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom.
Yep. I mean, it's not conducive to healing anymore. And I think that's where this create a workplace violence prevention committee, if you're not meeting with local legislators and you're not meeting with local law enforcement and you're not meeting with, all of the organizations in your community that can absorb these patients, you're not doing anything as part of your committee.
No, you're not. You're not. These guys come to the ER, do their 72 hours, they get assessed, and they get spit out to a facility. It's definitely not conducive to treatment and conducive to being healed. And that's part of the problem. They get frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to what I was saying, I think it's important that security does get some clinical training on being able to recognize certain behaviors, having knowledge of how bipolar, schizophrenia, and psychosis is manifested. If you don't understand how that is, all you see is behavior, and you address the behavior based on what you see, but you need to understand the root cause. And I think that's kind of what I'm pointing to. We're not focusing on that.
I would challenge you to say that entry-level officers don't need to know that. They need to know 3 things. They need to know if they're delusional, if they're like in some sort of delirium, which would be drug-induced, or they're traumatized, and figure out those 3. And then based on the behaviors that they exhibit, because one thing that we do have is that they're only going to exhibit human behaviors. They're not going to grow wings and fly away or disappear. And the problem is that the behaviors are disorganized. When you take a shower, do you take off your clothes before you get in the shower? Hopefully,
Absolutely.
Yeah. But grandma taking her clothes off in the middle of the hallway, the behavior's not wrong, but the time and the appropriateness of the behavior is what we consider incorrect for social norms. So our job is not necessarily to prevent the behavior, but to correct the disorganized behavior. So it doesn't matter to me what their diagnosis is. And it's just like CPR. If I go in the room and my patient's dead, I don't care what killed them at that minute. I just need to get their heart restarted. And I think that's the barrier that we face right now in healthcare, is nobody has really come together and said, these are the core things that we need to learn how to negotiate. Now, if you have extended time for training, you're doing ongoing training, let's start talking about schizophrenia. Let's start talking about bipolar. Let's start talking about the different diagnoses. But that shouldn't be your first day on the job. You get training on mental health.
I agree with that. But I think when the first time you see someone with auditory and visual hallucinations, if you don't understand what that is, I think your reaction is going to be different than, let's say, you understand what you're looking at. So, for example, this is a little bit different, but I had an autistic patient punch me in the face.
Mm-hmm.
He was 15 years old, so he was also a minor, so I couldn't really do too much. I knew that he was autistic. I knew that he was going through something. I
Mm.
took that punch and I kept it moving. I feel like if I didn't know that, the guy's going to eat my fist. So I think a lot of these guys who come
But my
in and they don't
question
know
to
what they're looking.
you, my question to you is, if he's autistic and going through something, why? And I'm not asking in a like punitive approach. I'm asking in a explain to me more about the scenario because I think this is a good learning opportunity. Why were you close enough to him to receive the punch?
So I wasn't. That's the thing. So he was in his room. I
Mm-hmm.
got at the doorway. His name's Christopher. I'm not going to obviously say his whole name. He likes to eat Otter Pops. I got an Otter Pop from one of the freezers and I handed it to his sitter. The sitter gave it to him. He ate it. He threw it on the ground as soon as he took a couple bites. And then he
Okay.
basically just beelined it to the doorway.
Okay.
We're taught reactionary distance, 4, 6, 8 feet, depending on their level of aggression. The problem with unpredictable people, such as autistic patients or anybody for that matter, they can go skip levels of conflict and
Mm-hmm.
go right to
Yep.
being combative. And
Yep.
I got caught with my pants down, essentially. I was a little complacent and then I ended up getting hit. Oh, did I have
My question is
technically?
why did he come at the door? Was he just trying to get out of his room and they didn't want him out of his
Yeah, I
room?
think he was. I mean, we really don't know the reasoning. I suspect that he just felt confined and he wanted to walk around
Yep.
the ER.
Yep.
Because I know a couple of the sitters did walk him around a couple times, so I'm thinking that's what it was. But he didn't have a way to articulate that because he's got the way his brain works. He's unable to articulate that. So I think he was trying to leave, and I felt
Mm-hmm.
like he thought I was a barrier to him leaving,
Yep.
and he felt a certain type of way, and he ended up punching me. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, had I not understood the context of the
You would
situation,
have been emotional about it.
absolutely. And I think a lot of the security officers who may have experienced that may not have handled it the same way that I handled it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think it's important to understand what you're looking at, the root causes of behavior. And I think that dictates your level of response.
And I would say in that situation, it doesn't matter what his diagnosis is. If he hits you in the face, he hit you in the face, and that's part of the event. But after that, then we need to deal with it properly with proper physical restraint. And then we need to probably figure out a way, which is why I love Doug Melia's system, which
Yeah,
is
I've seen him.
that belt. And the belt is really awesome because they can play video games. He can still eat a popsicle, but he can't extend his arm to punch you in the face.
You talking
And you
about the
can
body belts?
they're called safer handling restraints, and they're like
Yeah.
they go behind and then there's a little Velcro section that they put their arms in. Then you're able to help escort him places, all kinds of stuff. And to me,
Right.
that's like the proactive stuff that we need to be doing so that if he is getting up and walking around and we know that we want to limit that behavior, we can kind of scoop him up on either side of the arm and escort him back to the bed or escort him to a safety pod where he can sit down and be comfortable. But those are the things that as the organization, like you guys knew he was autistic. So like those are the things you should have taken the bed out of the room if he didn't need a bed, put the safety pod in the room, given him the restraint belt and done what you needed to do to take care of him so that he was safe in his environment and we didn't have those
100%.
issues. And you know how much that would have cost them? Fucking dirt. Nothing in comparison to if you decided to press charges against this kid and then it went to litigation and then all of the things that happened, you know?
How expensive are those safety pods? Because I know striker beds are pretty expensive.
Right, exactly. And you know what? A lot of patients, when we bring them in, will remove the bed completely, especially in jail. They're in all of the UK correctional facilities. And so what
Right.
they do is when they get somebody like that, they actually bring them in and it looks like a bean bag. So they'll
Yeah.
sit in that first. And then if they need to restrain them, they have time to go up to them and hold them in there instead of offering the opportunity to throw them onto the floor. And they have reduced like floor holding or any type of physical restraint, prone restraint by 70% in
You
corrections.
told me about that.
So I'm like, this is perfect. Put one room in the hospital that has your safety pod. Even if you have one room or two rooms that has or have the option for it, it's not very expensive and it comes with tremendous training, the best training in the world. And you want your staff, especially for pediatrics, for 15 or 18 or below. I think every mental health organization or every ER that sees pediatrics should at least have one of these things.
So are those pods all the same? Are they all designed the same? The reason why I asked that is because, as you know, there's so many different types of beds in healthcare. being able to find the anchor points for the restraints, they're
They
all
did it.
different.
And there's restraint systems out there now where we don't have to tie people to bed. You use their own body weight. They're safe. Like people are asking me for restraint options. I say, I don't recommend any type of restraint that requires you to tie. Even in the ICUs, when they're intubated, we have better solutions than that now. I don't
Right.
recommend them at all. Like I just think it's archaic. And I think if you're going to spend the money, you should spend the money on something that is good for the patient and good for the staff. And they're washable. You can reuse them. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous why we don't have those options now in healthcare, because you're going to dramatically reduce incidents as well as protect your. Imagine if you had that option for him and he hit you once and you're a good guy. So you took it. Okay, buddy, it's time to get this belt on. This will never happen to another staff member while you're here with us.
Comes down to education, it's a resource issue, and it comes down to education. If they're not even aware that these things exist, which I would think that a lot of the folks here in the United States don't even know these things exist.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. It sounds like it's pretty cost effective too, so they can't say that it's going to cost them any more money. So that can't be an excuse. So it really just comes down to them even being aware that these things are even available.
Right, and that's why we created the app. So we've got this new app, and it's free. You can download it, and on it has the different products that we recommend. And that's in there. So they can literally see a video, they can see training, they can get information. And then once they purchase, they can purchase it directly for their organization from there, meet with Doug and get a consult. And then he'll fly out, or you can book training with one of our guys and come out and train you on the restraints, and you're good to go. And you can get ongoing.
Are you cold calling these guys? Are you guys sending emails to these purchasing departments of these healthcare organizations?
Sometimes we do, but because I have really wanted to ensure the quality and not just put it into any organization that's going to be like, oh, well, we used it incorrectly, or, oh, we're not even using it. I wanted to make sure it was people like yourself and I who really do care and really at the top of leadership are like, I love this idea. I think it's great and innovative. And I think it's going to, save lives. And those are the type of people that I like to work with. I think there's an audience of training companies out there that'll just go and sell training to anybody for anything. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, I can do that. And because I was a cop and because I, did some mental health, police response stuff, that doesn't mean that you're an expert in healthcare. If you've never done a 12-hour shift or, been in the healthcare environment, you really don't understand what you're training for. You can try, and I'm grateful for people that are trying, but anybody who's using use of force continuums and teaching, restraint holding and, abuse pain compliance, they really haven't done their education, because I'm just a single mom nurse that decided to do something. They could have done everything that I've done too. They just want to, live within the confines of their comfort. And
subject matter experts for what they did is past tense. They never, again, continued education. They never sought after the clinical aspect of what healthcare security is. They're still holding on to the military and law enforcement mindset. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it, it's a collaborative thing. And the nuances of healthcare security are simply much different than law enforcement on the streets, in correctional facilities. It's not the same thing. The same things that work there, and I can argue that they didn't even work in those environments.
No, they don't.
Not, you see what I'm saying? They didn't even work in those environments. What makes you think it's going to work in this environment?
Our guys our guys are on contract somewhere, and they went through another training company here recently. And I just remember we were at like a team meeting later, and they were just like laughing at the techniques. They're like, compared to what we've learned with TACT and learned from our UK partners, like, this is ridiculous. Like the fact that people are getting paid and they're like so excited about this new training. And I'm like, this is 1980s George Floyd stuff. Like this is not good, modern, patient-centered, nurse-centered, healthcare worker-centered, policy-centered, litigation-centered at all. It's just something that people can throw in to check the box off,
That's exactly it. Most of these trainings that security get are simply ripoffs, and they change the name of academy level training. And I know this because I've went through the academy, and a lot of the stuff, terminology wise and techniques wise, is exactly the same. It's basically recycled stuff that has worked in the past, hasn't worked in the past, and we're going to put it into a different environment and let's see if it works. And workplace violence numbers indicate that it's not working.
It's
Armed
not. Like, if
security
you
doesn't
guys are
work.
so freaking good at this and you're the best and blah, 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 then why are the rates increasing? Why is it? And it's because it's a care issue. But of course, care really gets the revenue drivers. So who's going to challenge care? Who's going to say clinically, hey, you guys got to take a part in this? And I think you're speaking to a profession of really burnt out people. So there's a way to say things, right? Just like we talk about patients and interacting and customer service and all the things that you mentioned from an officer side, there's a way that you have to talk to your nurse employees as well. And when you put
Absolutely.
them through a class where the cop comes in and is like, hey, I used to be a police officer and we're going to do this and let me show you how to, we're like, shut up. Like I've been doing this for 15 years and I've never once used that and it doesn't work. And I don't know what you're talking about. And all I want to do is go home and sleep after my 12-hour night shift. Like now, if you've got someone in there that says, I was a nurse for 20 years and I've developed this system and let's talk about patients and let's share some stories and let's, like you just did, where they come to me, I'm like, tell me the last story of a time that you were violently assaulted. And we work through those scenarios that they bring to the class. I don't have to come in with stage scenarios, but because we're experts. And I'll say in true real time, what's the last thing that you saw? Okay, this happened. All right, let's walk back through it. Why did this happen? Where was proximity? Let's talk about all the things in real time because then they remember. Then the next time they go into the room, they're like, oh, I remember what Mel said because I trust Mel or I trust the trainer that's been at the bedside that knows what it's like. And I think that's the difference between being able to train from here down and change the culture from the bottom up.
Yeah, we implemented this thing called an S-bar. Are you familiar with S-bar?
Yeah, so S-bars, yes, S-bar is very common in healthcare. So I like that you guys are using that.
We're using that. It's really important. Anytime we have a use of force incident, specifically with the one with the autistic patient, we literally did an S-bar. We did a debriefing, and we essentially said, what could we have done better? What did we do well? And then going forward, how can we improve? There needs to be a scientific approach to security, bro. I know people don't want to believe this, but it's simply,
it's easy
it has
to do.
To be.
It's easy to do.
To be.
Everybody keeps telling me, oh, you could never standardize the response. You could never do that. I'm like, watch me. Hold my beer because it's coming. But anyway, I've been so excited to have you as a guest today. I am truly honored to have you in our network. And I think that you're an invaluable resource to us. I think that, having that really boots on the ground perception and the experience that you've seen over the years in the industry is really what's going to separate, programs like ours and opportunities like ours that we're offering to organizations in that nonprofit approach, for 2K, train your whole team. Like that's ridiculous. Healthcare organizations piss that. So I'm so excited to know you and thank you for everything that you're doing. And I hope that you stay safe out there and we can get you some additional training here soon.
Appreciate you, Mel. We'll talk later.
All right. Okay.